They thought he was just another weak inmate, until he moved. 3 men down in 6 seconds, no wasted motion, no mercy. And when even the guards froze in place, that's when everyone realized they weren't dealing with a man. They were dealing with a ghost from the battlefield. But what triggered the Phantom Wolf to finally strike? And why did the government come back for him years later? Don't scroll. The next part will make your jaw drop. What would you do if the quietest man in the room turned out to be the most dangerous one there? The gates of Grey Ridge State Penitentiary groaned open under the grey morning light, and out stepped a man whose silence spoke louder than the guards' barks or the inmates' jeers. Cole Mercer walked in with the expression of someone who had already seen the worst life could offer. Lean, mid-40s, a shaved head, grey t-shirt clinging to a wiry but strong frame, and eyes that didn't wander. Not once. He carried himself like a man who knew pain intimately, but had never been owned by it. The inmates along the tier leaned forward, whistling, barking, testing the fresh blood. New fish always got the same welcome. But this time, something felt off. Cole didn't flinch, didn't look up. He just walked, unbothered, as if this entire place was beneath his attention, and that more than anything, put them on edge. Rico Slater watched him from the upper level like a lion tracking a limping gazelle. Rico was the self-declared king of Cell Block D, built like a freight train, tattoos crawling up his neck, eyes that smiled only when someone was crying. He didn't tolerate disrespect or indifference. To Rico, silence was an insult. So when Cole refused to react to the snide comments, the thrown crumbs of bread, and the welcome shoves, Rico took it personally. By the second day, Rico and his crew cornered Cole near the laundry room. No guards in sight, just the stench of bleach, sweat, and something sourer, the thrill of a manhunt. Rico got inches from Cole's face, laughing as he called him Mouse and Grandpa, pushing at his chest, trying to light a spark. But Cole just stood there, calm, quiet, staring through Rico like he wasn't even there. No fear, no anger, just an unsettling stillness. It was enough to make Rico's smile falter for a split second. The other inmates started watching, murmurs growing. Who doesn't react to Rico Slater? Who doesn't even blink? Rico escalated. On day 3, he had one of his boys dump a tray of slop over Cole's head in the cafeteria. The room exploded in laughter. Cole didn't wipe it off, didn't yell, just calmly picked up the tray and walked out, leaving footprints behind him, soaked in gravy and humiliation. Rico thought he was winning, but deep down, even his crew started feeling the shift. Cole wasn't breaking, he was waiting. The turning point came on a Thursday afternoon, yard time, sun high, the inmates restless. Rico had been planning something special, a full-on takedown. He wanted to break Cole publicly, to reclaim his reputation. His boys surrounded Cole by the pull-up bars, casual at first. Comments, light shoves, a circle slowly closing in. Then Rico stepped forward with a shank made from melted toothbrush plastic and a razor blade, just enough to scare, not kill. He smirked and whispered, "Time to see what's hiding under that silence, ghost boy." What happened next felt like a glitch in reality. Before anyone could blink, Cole moved. It was precise, explosive, inhuman. He grabbed Rico's wrist, twisted until the shank clattered to the ground, then drove an elbow into his jaw with a sickening crack. Rico collapsed. The other 2 lunged. One got flipped over Cole's back with a bone-snapping scream. The other took a punch so fast and clean it looked choreographed. 3 men, 6 seconds. Silence. The yard froze. Even the guards, armed, trained, hardened, stood still for a beat, unsure whether to intervene or just stay out of it. Cole didn't look proud, didn't raise his fists. He just stood over Rico, blood dripping from his knuckles, breathing slow and steady like he'd just finished a warm-up. Then he turned, walked to the bench by the fence, and sat down like nothing happened. Within an hour, Rico was in the infirmary with a shattered jaw and fractured ribs. His crew disbanded. No one spoke of revenge. No one dared. By sunrise, Cole Mercer wasn't just respected, he was mythologized. The name Phantom Wolf began circling in whispers, carried from guard to inmate to the warden's office. Files were pulled, records cross-checked. What they found sent chills down spines. Cole wasn't just a man. He was once the commander of a covert special forces unit, responsible for missions buried so deep they didn't officially exist. He had disappeared years ago after an operation gone wrong, presumed dead. Now here he was, serving time for a crime no one dared ask about, surrounded by people who suddenly realized they were in a cage with a predator. But Cole didn't want power. He didn't lead a gang. He didn't take over the block. He simply existed quietly, and that was enough. When he walked by, doors opened, eyes lowered. Even the guards stepped aside. Rico. He refused to leave the infirmary for days, humiliated beyond repair. His throne was gone. Cole hadn't taken it. He had erased it. And so, in the most brutal place imaginable, ruled by violence and fear, it was silence that won. The silence of a man who had nothing left to prove, who had seen too much, lost too much, and was willing to stay invisible until someone forced him to remind the world who he truly was. If this story struck something inside you, tell us. What would you have done if you were in Cole's shoes? Would you have waited, or would you have struck first? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the quietest voice carries the loudest echo. Cole never spoke about his past. Not to the guards, not to the chaplain, not even to the old-timers who tried to break the silence over games of cards or late-night stories passed through cell bars. But every now and then, in the dead of night, a scream from another inmate would pierce the silence, followed by hurried apologies or the dragging shuffle of someone moving cells. No one wanted to sleep too close to the man with war behind his eyes. One guard, a former Marine named Davis, finally got the courage to approach him. Davis wasn't like the others. He recognized the way Cole scanned rooms, how he never let anyone stand behind him, how he timed his movements with the rhythm of routine chaos. He offered him a book, something about recon tactics in the Middle East. Cole took it, nodded once, and that was enough for Davis to understand. This wasn't some fantasy. This was real. Cole had lived that life. Rumors ran wild. Some said he'd taken out an entire cartel base in Nicaragua with just a knife and a map. Others swore he used to be part of a shadow team called Ghost Echo. But the most persistent rumor was the most unbelievable. That the government had faked his death because he knew too much. That whatever landed him in Grey Ridge was never about justice. It was about keeping him contained. Still, Cole never confirmed or denied. He simply existed in a state of controlled calm until one day things shifted again. A new inmate arrived, younger, loud, muscular, the kind that worked out just to have something to control. His name was Travis "Tank" Monroe, and he didn't believe in legends. He'd heard the stories about Cole and laughed. "Old man's a myth," he said to his bunkmate. "A washed-up soldier who got caught and cried his way in here." The guards tried to warn him. Even Rico, still chewing soft food through a wired jaw, flinched when Tank mentioned Cole's name. But Tank was too proud, too stupid, or maybe too desperate to prove something. He made his move during kitchen duty. Cole stood by the sinks, scrubbing a tray when Tank came from behind, slamming a rolling cart into his back. The kitchen clattered with noise. Everyone froze. Cole dropped the tray, slowly turned around, and for a moment, just a split second, Tank's bravado cracked. He saw something in Cole's eyes, something vast, something empty. No fists were thrown, no bones broken. Cole just stepped closer and whispered one sentence that no one else could hear. Whatever it was, it made Tank back away, like he'd touched fire. He never came near Cole again. From that day forward, the legend grew into something more. Cole had become a symbol, not just of fear, but of restraint, of power with control. He never used his fists unless forced, never raised his voice. never sought revenge, and yet the entire prison rotated around his silence. One night, during a lockdown, an old man in the infirmary had a heart attack. The guards were overwhelmed. The power was out. The man was dying. And somehow, through the confusion, it was Cole who appeared at the door. He took over, performed chest compressions with clinical precision, whispered calmly to the old man until the med team arrived. The man survived. After that, even the warden called him Sir. Cole Mercer didn't need redemption. He didn't ask for forgiveness. But in a place where monsters ruled and masks hid every weakness, he became something rare, a man who had been to hell and walked back, not to boast, but to make sure no one else had to go there alone. If you stayed with this story until now, maybe you're wondering why someone like Cole ended up behind bars. What could a man like that have done? Maybe someday we'll tell that story too. But until then, remember this.
Look at him.
Power doesn't
shaking.
always roar. Sometimes it's silent, patient, and when it strikes, the world never forgets. And if you were moved by this tale, drop a comment below. Would you trust a man like Cole or fear him? Would you follow someone who never asked to lead? We want to hear from you, because every story has more than one truth, and sometimes the quietest ones matter most. Months passed, but the echoes of that first explosion, Cole taking down Rico in the yard, never faded. They only deepened. Grey Ridge State Penitentiary, once a boiling pot of ego, violence and posturing, changed in ways no one expected. There were fewer fights, fewer tests of dominance. And when tensions did rise, it was enough for Cole to simply walk into the room for everything to calm. Not because he was feared like a tyrant, but because he was respected like a legend. The kind that you don't challenge, because you might not survive what follows. The guards started to treat him differently too. Not with friendship. They knew better than to try and breach that wall, but with caution and a certain reverence. When inspections happened, Cole's cell was never the one torn apart. When shifts changed, rookies were quietly warned, "Don't mess with 4B, that's Mercer's block." And yet, Cole never took advantage of his position. He didn't form alliances, he didn't traffic contraband or take cuts from anyone. He read, he worked out. He wrote letters no one ever saw him send. And every once in a while, on sleepless nights when the prison howled with the chaos of locked-up men trying to escape their own minds, he would stare out the narrow window of his cell, face bathed in pale moonlight, and look like he was somewhere else entirely. Then one day something changed. A lawyer showed up, not for parole, not for an appeal. The woman wore a crisp black suit, carried a folder marked Classified Access, and requested a private meeting with Cole. It caused a stir so loud the whole block buzzed for a week. When Cole returned from that meeting, his face unreadable as ever, he said nothing. But that night, for the first time since arriving at Grey Ridge, he was seen smiling. Just for a moment, just barely. But it was there. Whispers started to fly again. Had the government come back for him? Was he being released, recruited, erased? But days turned into weeks and Cole stayed until the night the power went out. Complete blackout. Every generator failed, cameras dead, lights off, inmates shouting, guards scrambling, emergency lockdown initiated, chaos. It was the perfect storm for a breakout, or a bloodbath, and yet, through the confusion, a group of masked men breached the walls. Military, silent, efficient, not inmates, not guards, something else. They weren't there to attack, they were there for one person, Cole. They moved through Grey Ridge like ghosts, finding him already waiting at his cell door. No resistance, no fear, just that same quiet readiness. He turned to Davis, the Marine turned guard, and handed him a folded piece of paper. "If they ask," he said, "tell them I finally went home." Then he was gone. The next morning, the power was back. The damage was minimal, no one injured. And Cole Mercer's cell was empty, wiped clean as if he'd never existed. The paper he left behind, it wasn't a confession. It wasn't a threat. It was a list of names, government officials, private contractors, people who had betrayed the team he once led, sold out missions, cost lives. At the bottom of the page was a note, written in sharp, neat handwriting. Justice doesn't die in the dark, it waits. And when the time is right, it finishes what others were too afraid to start. Cole Mercer was never seen in prison again, but in war zones across the globe, whispers began to surface. Of a shadow in the hills, a man who walks through bullets, who takes down targets with surgical precision and vanishes before sunrise. They called him the Phantom Wolf. And back in Grey Ridge, Cell Block D told the story differently now. Not about a man who got mocked, but about the mistake that cost Rico Slater his crown. The day a predator got exposed for thinking he ruled the jungle, only to discover the real king was just biding his time. So what about you? Would you have recognized the danger in that quiet stare? Or laughed with the rest, thinking silence meant weakness? Let us know in the comments. Because the scariest men aren't the loudest. They're the ones who don't need to speak at all. And if you made it this far, maybe ask yourself, what kind of strength do you carry in silence? Because sometimes the quiet ones change everything. Years went by. New inmates came, old ones were released or buried, and the legend of Cole Mercer refused to fade. In fact, it grew. Grey Ridge State Penitentiary became a place not just feared for its walls or guards, but whispered about because of one name. Whenever a new prisoner tried to act tough, someone would always lean in and say, "You ever hear about the Phantom Wolf?" It was like a rite of passage, being told the story of the man who never raised his voice, never sought power, yet turned the entire hierarchy upside down. Even the warden, a man who prided himself on control, kept a framed copy of Cole's final note in his office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the systems built to break men only reveal their true nature. But Cole didn't vanish forever. One winter, deep in the mountains of Colorado, a small village faced a crisis. A wildfire raged for days, cutting off roads and trapping families with no access to outside help. Communications were down. Helicopters couldn't fly through the smoke. Everyone feared the worst. Then out of nowhere a man appeared, tall, shaved head, silent, calm. He organized an evacuation with military precision, created makeshift paths, coordinated volunteers, carried the elderly on his back through the snow and ash. When the National Guard finally arrived, most of the village was already safe. They asked who was in charge. The locals pointed to the man sitting on a rock, watching the smoke rise. But he was gone. No name, no trace. Just a message carved into a tree near the edge of town. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. There were photographs, of course. Blurry, grainy, none confirmed. But when one image leaked to the internet, a side profile, the stance unmistakable, Grey Ridge inmates, now spread across different prisons, saw it anew. It was him, and the story began again. In places of pain and punishment, stories like Cole's aren't just told, they're believed, because they offer something rare, proof that even in the darkest places, a light can appear. Not loud, not boastful, just steady, relentless, and maybe necessary. So if you're watching this and wondering, why does this matter to me? Ask yourself this: have you ever been underestimated? Mocked for being quiet? Dismissed because you didn't play by their rules? Then remember Cole Mercer. Remember what happens when power lies not in fists or threats, but in control, in silence, in choosing not to strike until it's absolutely necessary. That's the real strength. And if this story touched something inside you, don't let it end here. Share it. Tell someone, because the world needs to hear more about the kind of power that doesn't scream for attention, but still leaves an impact that never fades. And now I ask you, who's the quietest person you know? Could they be carrying something no one's ready for? Let's talk in the comments, because sometimes the most dangerous wolves wear sheep's clothing by choice.